My name is Melissa. I'm 28 years old. I still remember the exact moment my life turned upside down. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I was sitting in my cubicle at TechFlow Financial, nursing my third cup of coffee and reviewing the overnight security logs. That's when Brad stormed over to my desk, his face redder than a stop sign. "Melissa! Conference room. Now!" His voice was sharp enough to cut glass, and half the office turned to stare. I could feel my cheeks burning as I grabbed my laptop and followed him down the hall. The conference room felt like a courtroom. Brad sat across from me, flanked by two HR representatives I'd never seen before. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across everyone's faces. "Do you want to tell me what happened last night?" Brad's voice was deceptively calm, but I could see the vein pulsing in his temple. My stomach dropped. "I'm not sure what you mean." The overnight logs looked normal to me. Normal. He slammed a folder on the table. 50,000 customer records were accessed by an unauthorized third party. Credit card numbers, social security numbers, addresses, everything. And guess whose security protocols were supposed to prevent this? I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Brad, I need to see the logs. If there was a breach, we need to understand how it happened and—" "I'll tell you how it happened," he interrupted. "Your security systems failed. Your monitoring failed. You failed." One of the HR reps, a woman with severe glasses and a clipboard, leaned forward. "Melissa, we need to understand your role in this incident. Walk us through your security procedures." This was insane. I'd been working as a cybersecurity analyst for 3 years, and I'd never had a single security incident on my watch. Not one. I lived and breathed security protocols. I was the person who sent those annoying emails reminding people to update their passwords and install security patches. "I run comprehensive security scans every week," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I monitor all network traffic, maintain firewall configurations, and send weekly security reports to management. I've documented every vulnerability I've found and every recommendation I've made." Brad scoffed. Clearly, that wasn't enough. Actually, it would have been if my recommendations had been implemented. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was tired of being the scapegoat. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Brad's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've sent you 47 security warnings in the past 8 months. 47. And how many of them were addressed?" 3. Maybe 4. "That's ridiculous. We address all critical security issues." "Do we?" "Because I have the emails to prove otherwise." The HR woman made a note on her clipboard. "Melissa, we're going to need you to provide documentation of all your security activities for the past year. We'll be conducting a full investigation." As we left the conference room, Brad grabbed my arm. "You need to be very careful about what you say during this investigation. Your job depends on it." Walking back to my desk, I felt like everyone was staring at me. Word travels fast in a small office, and I could hear the whispers starting already. By lunch, everyone would know I was responsible for the biggest security breach in the company's history. But here's the thing. I wasn't responsible. And I could prove it. You see, I'd learned early in my career that in the tech world, covering your ass is just as important as covering your code. Every security warning I sent, every recommendation I made, every protocol I suggested, I documented all of it. Screenshots, email chains, system logs. I had it all. That night, I went home to my studio apartment in Capitol Hill and spread everything out on my kitchen table. 8 months of documentation. 47 security warnings. Hundreds of emails. And a clear pattern of negligence that led straight to Brad's desk. Let me tell you about Brad. He was 35, had been with the company for 6 years, and was the kind of manager who cared more about hitting deadlines than hitting security standards. He had this philosophy that security was just an obstacle to getting things done quickly. "Move fast and break things," he'd say, quoting Facebook's old motto. The problem was, when you move fast in cybersecurity, you don't just break things, you break trust, you break privacy, and sometimes you break the law. I'd been hired specifically to tighten up TechFlow security after they'd had a couple of minor incidents the year before. Nothing major. Just some phishing attempts and a couple of employees clicking on suspicious links. But in fintech, even minor security issues can become major regulatory headaches. From day one, I'd been thorough. Maybe too thorough. I'd identified vulnerabilities in their customer database, weaknesses in their authentication systems, and gaps in their data encryption. I'd written detailed reports, created prioritized action plans, and sent weekly updates to Brad and the executive team. And from day one, Brad had been pushing back. "We can't implement all these changes right now," he'd say. "We have a product launch coming up." Or, "The development team is too busy with the new features to worry about security updates." Or my personal favorite, "We've never had a major security incident, so this is probably overkill." I'd tried everything. I'd explained the risks in technical terms, in business terms, in plain English. I'd shown him examples of other companies that had suffered breaches. I'd even calculated the potential financial impact of a security incident, which, as it turned out, was eerily accurate. But Brad had one priority: launching the new mobile app on schedule. The app was supposed to be TechFlow's big breakthrough, their entry into the competitive mobile payments market. The executives had promised investors a March launch, and Brad was determined to deliver. The problem was, the app was a security nightmare. I'd identified 12 critical vulnerabilities in the beta version. 12. The authentication system was weak, the data encryption was outdated, and the API endpoints were practically begging to be exploited. I'd written a 20-page security assessment and marked it as critical. Do not launch without addressing these issues. Brad's response? "We'll patch these after launch. Right now, we need to focus on functionality." That was 3 weeks before the breach. As I sat at my kitchen table, going through all the documentation, I started to piece together exactly what had happened. The breach had come through one of the API endpoints I'd specifically flagged as vulnerable. The attackers had used a technique I'd warned about in my February security report. They'd accessed the customer database through a pathway I'd recommended securing back in January. Everything I'd predicted had come true. Every warning I'd given had been ignored. And now Brad was trying to pin it all on me. The next morning, I walked into the office with a different attitude. Instead of feeling defeated, I felt determined. I had 3 file folders full of evidence, and I was ready to use them. But Brad wasn't done with me yet. "Melissa, we need to talk," he said, appearing at my desk before I'd even turned on my computer. "My office. Now." His office was a shrine to his own ambition. Awards on the walls, photos of him with various executives, and a bookshelf filled with business books he'd probably never read. He closed the door behind us and sat down across from me. "Look," he said, his voice softer now, almost friendly. "I know yesterday was rough. But here's the thing. The executives are looking for someone to blame for this breach. They're talking about heads rolling, people getting fired, maybe even criminal charges if the SEC gets involved." I felt my mouth go dry. Criminal charges? Yeah, this is serious stuff. 50,000 customers affected, millions in potential damages, regulatory investigations. Someone's going to pay for this. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But it doesn't have to be you. I've been thinking about this all night, and I think there's a way we can frame this as a systems failure rather than a personnel failure. Maybe the security software malfunctioned, or maybe there was a bug in the code that nobody could have predicted." I stared at him. "You want me to lie? I want you to be smart. Look, I know you sent me some security recommendations over the past few months. But let's be honest, they were buried in technical jargon that nobody could understand. And some of them were frankly unrealistic given our timeline and budget constraints." Unrealistic? I was asking you to implement basic security protocols. Basic to you, maybe. But you have to understand, not everyone has your technical background. When you send me a 20-page report full of technical terms, I have to rely on my team to help me understand what's actually critical and what's just nice to have. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Brad, I marked 12 vulnerabilities as critical. I used the word critical 47 times in my reports. How much clearer could I have been? Look, I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm trying to help you. If you work with me on this, I can make sure you come out of this investigation looking good. Maybe even with a promotion." "And if I don't work with you?" His friendly mask slipped for just a moment. Then you're going to be the cybersecurity analyst who let 50,000 customer records get stolen. How do you think that's going to look on your resume? After that conversation, I knew I was in a war. But Brad had made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed I was just another employee who would roll over when threatened. He didn't know that I'd been preparing for this battle for months. That afternoon, I started putting together what I privately called my nuclear option, a comprehensive documentation package that would prove, beyond any doubt, that I'd done everything right and Brad had done everything wrong. I started with the emails. Every security warning I'd sent, every recommendation I'd made, every follow-up I'd written. I organized them chronologically, highlighting the dates and Brad's responses. Or in most cases, his lack of responses. Then I pulled the system logs. These were the technical records that showed exactly what security measures were in place and when they were modified. They told a clear story. I'd implemented strong security protocols, and then someone with administrative access had systematically disabled them. Guess who had administrative access to override my security settings? That's right, Brad. Next, I documented the timeline leading up to the breach. 3 weeks before the incident, I'd sent Brad a detailed report about the API vulnerabilities. 2 weeks before, I'd followed up with a shorter email marked urgent. 1 week before, I'd sent another follow-up, this time copying the Chief Technology Officer. Brad's response to that last email was particularly damning. "Melissa, please stop sending these alarmist emails to the executive team. We've discussed this, and we're comfortable with our current security posture." The breach had happened through the exact vulnerability I'd been warning about. But the smoking gun was in the system logs from the day before the breach. Someone had logged into the security system and disabled 3 critical monitoring protocols. The timestamp showed it had happened at 11:47 p.m. on a Monday night. The user ID showed it was Brad's account. I'd found my proof. The investigation dragged on for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of meetings, interviews, and document reviews. 2 weeks of sideways glances from coworkers and whispered conversations that stopped when I walked by. 2 weeks of Brad acting like he was doing me a favor by not throwing me under the bus completely. Through it all, I kept my mouth shut and my documentation close. I answered the investigators' questions honestly but didn't volunteer any additional information. I was waiting for the right moment to play my cards. That moment came during the final investigation meeting. The conference room was packed. Brad, 2 HR representatives, the Chief Technology Officer, the Chief Security Officer, and a lawyer from the company's legal department. Based on our investigation, the lead HR representative began, we've determined that the security breach was the result of inadequate security protocols and insufficient monitoring of network traffic. I felt my heart sink. They were going to pin this on me. However, she continued, we want to give Ms. Patterson an opportunity to respond to these findings before we make any final determinations. This was it. My moment. I opened my laptop and pulled up my presentation. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to respond. I've prepared a comprehensive review of the security measures that were in place leading up to the breach. Brad looked nervous for the first time since this whole thing started. First, let me address the claim that security protocols were inadequate. I clicked to my first slide, which showed a timeline of all my security recommendations. Over the past 8 months, I identified and documented 47 security vulnerabilities. I provided detailed recommendations for addressing each one, including implementation timelines and resource requirements. I clicked to the next slide, which showed Brad's response rate to my recommendations. Of these 47 recommendations, 3 were fully implemented, 6 were partially implemented, and 38 were ignored entirely. The Chief Security Officer leaned forward. Can you provide documentation of these recommendations? Of course. I clicked to the next slide, which showed screenshots of my emails to Brad. These are just a few examples of the security warnings I sent. As you can see, I was very clear about the risks and the urgency of addressing them. Brad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Melissa, I think you're taking some of these communications out of context. Am I? I clicked to the next slide, which showed his response to one of my most urgent warnings. This is your response to my February 15th email about the API vulnerabilities. And I quote, Melissa, we don't have time to redesign the entire security architecture. We'll address these issues after the app launch. The lawyer was taking notes furiously. The chief technology officer was frowning at his tablet, probably reading through the email chain I'd just referenced. But the most troubling finding, I continued, is what happened the night before the breach. I clicked to my final slide, which showed the system logs from that Monday night. At 11:47 p.m., someone logged into our security system and disabled 3 critical monitoring protocols. These were the exact protocols that would have detected and prevented the type of attack we experienced. The room was dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. The user ID for this login was Brad M. Admin. That's Brad's administrative account. Brad's face went white. I can explain that. I was troubleshooting a performance issue. The monitoring protocols were slowing down the system. At 11:47 p.m. the night before our biggest product launch? That seems like unusual timing for routine maintenance. The chief security officer was staring at Brad like he'd just confessed to murder. Brad, did you disable security protocols without consulting with the cybersecurity team? It was just temporary. I was going to re-enable them after the launch. You disabled security protocols during our highest risk period without authorization? I was trying to ensure the app launch went smoothly. By disabling the systems that were specifically designed to protect us? The room erupted in heated conversation. The lawyer was whispering urgently to the HR representatives. The chief technology officer was shaking his head in disbelief. The chief security officer was asking Brad increasingly pointed questions about his decision-making process. Through it all, I sat quietly, watching my documentation do the talking for me. The meeting ended with Brad being escorted out of the building. They didn't even let him go back to his office to pack up his things. Security walked him to the parking garage, and that was the last time I saw him. The aftermath was swift and satisfying. The investigation concluded that the breach was the result of Brad's negligence and his deliberate disabling of security protocols. The company issued a public statement taking responsibility for the incident and outlining the steps they were taking to prevent future breaches. 3 days later, the chief security officer called me into her office. I'd worked with Karen a few times over the past year, but this was the first time we'd had a one-on-one meeting. "Melissa, I owe you an apology," she said as I sat down. "I should have been more involved in the security operations. If I'd been paying closer attention, I would have seen what was happening." "It's not your fault," I said. "Brad was very good at managing up. He told the executives what they wanted to hear." "Well, he won't be telling anyone anything anymore. He's been terminated, and we're considering legal action for gross negligence." She leaned back in her chair. "Which brings me to why I wanted to talk to you. We need a new IT director. Someone who understands security, who can communicate effectively with both technical and non-technical stakeholders, and who has the integrity to make hard decisions even when they're unpopular." My heart started racing. "Are you offering me the job?" "I'm offering you the job. $25,000 salary increase, full benefits, and a team of 4 people reporting to you. Plus, you'll have direct access to the executive team and full authority to implement security protocols without interference." I tried to play it cool, but inside I was doing cartwheels. What about the rest of Brad's team? Are they going to be okay with me being promoted over them? Frankly, most of them are relieved. They knew Brad was cutting corners, but they were afraid to speak up. They're looking forward to working with someone who actually prioritizes security. The transition was smoother than I'd expected. Brad's team, now my team, was incredibly supportive. They'd been just as frustrated as I was with the constant pressure to compromise security for speed. With Brad gone, we were finally able to implement the protocols we'd been recommending for months. The first thing I did was conduct a comprehensive security audit of all our systems. We found 17 additional vulnerabilities that Brad had been ignoring. We fixed them all within a month. The second thing I did was establish a new policy. Any executive who wanted to override a security recommendation had to put their request in writing and assume personal responsibility for the consequences. Suddenly, everyone became much more willing to listen to security concerns. The third thing I did was hire 2 additional cybersecurity analysts. The company had been operating with minimal security staff for too long, and I was determined to build a team that could stay ahead of threats rather than just reacting to them. 6 months later, TechFlow passed its first comprehensive security audit in 3 years. The auditors were impressed with our protocols, our documentation, and our proactive approach to threat detection. The company's insurance rates went down, and we were able to pursue partnerships with larger financial institutions that had previously been concerned about our security posture. But the sweetest moment came about a year later, when I ran into Brad at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle. He was sitting alone, looking at his laptop, and I could see he was browsing job listings. "Hey, Brad," I said, walking over to his table. "How's the job search going?" He looked up, and I could see the recognition and embarrassment in his eyes. "Oh, hey, Melissa. It's going okay. You know how it is." "Actually, I don't. I've been pretty busy with my new role as IT director. We just closed our biggest security audit ever. No major findings, no recommendations, just a clean bill of health." He managed a weak smile. "That's great. I'm glad things are working out for you. You know, I heard through the grapevine that you're having trouble finding a new position. Something about companies being concerned about your approach to security management." His face flushed red. The breach wasn't entirely my fault. There were a lot of factors involved. Sure, there were. But taking responsibility for your decisions is part of being a leader, don't you think? I didn't wait for his response. I picked up my coffee and walked away, leaving him sitting there with his job listings and his regrets. Looking back on the whole experience, I learned some valuable lessons. First, documentation is everything. If you're going to work in a field where lives and livelihoods depend on your expertise, you need to be able to prove you did your job correctly. Second, standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. And third, sometimes the best revenge is simply being really, really good at your job. The data breach that was supposed to end my career ended up being the beginning of the best chapter of my professional life. I went from being an overlooked analyst to being a respected leader, and I did it by sticking to my principles and trusting in my expertise. These days, I'm known throughout the company as someone who doesn't compromise on security, and I wear that reputation proudly. My team knows that I'll support them when they raise concerns, and the executives know that when I say something is critical, it actually is critical. And Brad. Last I heard, he was working as a project manager for a small web development company, making about half what he used to make at TechFlow. He's probably learned his lesson about the importance of cybersecurity, but it was an expensive education. As for me, I'm still at TechFlow, still fighting the good fight for cybersecurity, still documenting everything, and still proving that sometimes the best way to get ahead is to simply do your job really, really well. The moral of the story? Cover your assets, stick to your principles, and never underestimate the power of good documentation. Because in the end, the truth has a way of protecting the people who protect it.